Picture this. The snow falls endlessly over the Sierra Nevada mountains, silent and merciless. Beneath the white drifts, a group of pioneers huddles inside makeshift cabins, starving, desperate, and frozen. Their food is gone. Their animals are dead. Days turn to weeks, and the line between life and death blurs. Outside, wolves howl in the darkness. Inside, a horrifying decision is made. One that will forever stain American history with the name, the Donner Party. In the spring of 1846, nearly 90 pioneers set out from Springfield, Illinois, chasing a dream, the promise of a better life in California. They were ordinary families, farmers, carpenters, children, and parents, all bound by hope and courage. Led by George Donner and James Reed, they joined one of many wagon trains headed west across the vast American frontier. But unlike the others, this group would never make it to their destination. Trapped by snow in the Sierra Nevada mountains, their journey would become one of the most harrowing survival stories in history. The Donner Party's tragedy began not with snow, but with a shortcut, a dangerous new route called the Hastings Cutoff. It promised to save time, but instead cost them everything. As the group ventured deeper into the wilderness, mistakes, pride, and bad luck conspired against them. By the time winter came, they were stranded, isolated, starving, and surrounded by death. What happened next would shock the world. An act of desperation so grim that it would forever redefine the limits of human endurance and the darkness that hunger can awaken within. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy dark history stories like this, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your feedback in the comments. It helps us uncover more forgotten tragedies from the past. The story of the Donner Party began with sunlight, laughter, and hope. In April of 1846, wagons rolled out from Springfield, Illinois, their wheels creaking over the muddy roads of the American frontier. There were families and children waving from under white canvas covers, oxen pulling heavy loads of furniture, and men walking beside them with rifles and dreams. George and Jacob Donner, two brothers in their 60s, were seasoned pioneers, while James F. Reed was ambitious and confident, eager to reach California's fertile valleys. They were just one of many wagon trains headed west that year, part of a mass migration known as the California Trail. But unlike the others, their name would one day be whispered in horror. The early journey was almost idyllic. Across the plains of Kansas and the open expanses of Wyoming, the travelers faced hardship, but also camaraderie. Campfires flickered beneath endless skies, and the scent of coffee and wood smoke filled the air. They celebrated small victories: a river safely crossed, a child's laughter after a long day's march. But as the weeks passed, decisions began to divide them. James Reed had brought with him a controversial guidebook by Lansford Hastings, promising a faster route to California. The Hastings Cutoff, it claimed, would shave weeks off the journey by cutting directly through Utah's Great Salt Lake Desert and across the Sierra Nevada. Other emigrants warned against it. Hastings himself had never traveled the route with wagons, and those who had attempted it reported disaster. But ambition and optimism can be blinding. Reed convinced the Donners and several others to take the gamble. It was a choice that would seal their fate. By late July, they reached Fort Bridger in present-day Wyoming, the last trading post before the uncharted wilderness. Hastings had already passed through, leaving a note nailed to a forked stick, urging travelers to follow his trail through the Wasatch Mountains. It was a fateful invitation. The path ahead was treacherous, choked with trees, steep canyons, and narrow ravines. For days, the group hacked through timber, moving barely a mile a day. The oxen grew weak, the wagons splintered. Every mile westward drained their strength and their hope. Imagine their despair when they finally emerged from the mountains, only to face the endless white glare of the Great Salt Lake Desert, a shimmering wasteland of salt and mirage that stretched as far as the eye could see. They entered the desert in early August, unaware that it stretched nearly twice as far as Hastings had claimed. The heat was merciless. The oxen stumbled and collapsed, tongues swollen, their hides streaked with dust and blood. Wagons broke down, water barrels emptied. One family abandoned everything but what they could carry. The sun burned through their skin by day and froze them by night. Children cried for water, their lips cracked and bleeding. When they finally reached the other side, weeks later, they had lost dozens of oxen and most of their supplies. Reed's leadership came under fire. Tempers flared and arguments broke into violence. In one tragic incident, James Reed stabbed and killed a man during a dispute. The group banished him from the party, forcing him to ride ahead alone on horseback. They would not see him again for months. By October, the Donner Party, now fractured and weary, reached the eastern slopes of the Sierra Nevada. Snow had begun to dust the peaks, but they believed they could cross before winter truly set in. They were wrong. A brutal early storm swept down from the mountains, burying the passes in snow so deep that wagons sank up to their axles. The oxen could go no farther. With the trail impassable, the group made camp near a small lake, today known as Donner Lake. They built crude shelters from fallen logs and canvas, shoring up their wagons against the wind. At first, they believed rescue would come soon, but as days turned to weeks, the snow kept falling, trapping them in a frozen prison with dwindling food. The game was gone. Their cattle, too weak to survive, were slaughtered one by one. The hides were boiled into a foul jelly that barely sustained them. Some gnawed on bark, pine cones, and even leather from their shoes. Children grew skeletal, their cheeks hollow, their eyes dull. The wind howled through the cracks of their shanties, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze solid beside the fire. They called their rough cabins Truckee Camp and Alder Creek. Between the two camps, nearly 80 people waited for help that never came. But here's the chilling part. The snow did not stop. It piled higher than the roofs of their cabins, burying wagons whole. They were trapped for months. The once cheerful pioneers were now gaunt shadows, barely able to move. Death came slowly, quietly. First to the weakest, the elderly, the infants. They buried them in shallow graves that froze solid before they could finish. When even the hides were gone, the survivors faced an unthinkable choice. Hunger has a way of eroding morality, and desperation silences the conscience. One night, the decision was made. When another member of the group died, they did not bury the body. They ate it, they wept as they did it. Some prayed. Others refused, choosing starvation over sin. But as more people died, the line between survival and horror blurred. They cooked the flesh carefully, avoiding faces, hands, and hearts, as if those parts were still sacred. Children were told it was wolf meat. And yet, the guilt remained, a torment that would haunt them long after the snow melted. The act was not born from savagery, but from a terrible, instinctive will to live. Imagine sitting in that cabin, your breath freezing in the air, the silence broken only by the crack of ice outside and the sound of someone whispering a prayer over the dead. While the survivors in the mountains suffered, James Reed, now safely across the Sierra, was fighting to save them. In California, he gathered supplies and volunteers, pleading for men to accompany him back through the snow. But the winter was the harshest anyone could remember. The first rescue party, later called the Forlorn Hope, set out on snowshoes from the camp in December. 15 people determined to find help or die trying. They carried a few scraps of food and the last of their strength. For days, they trudged through blizzards and endless drifts, their feet blackened with frostbite. One by one, they collapsed. In the end, only 7 reached safety, half dead and haunted. They had survived by doing what the others had, consuming the dead. Back at Donner Lake, the survivors waited, too weak to cry, too numb to feel. The rescue parties came in waves over the next few months, each finding scenes that would scar them forever. Frozen bodies lay beside fire pits, bones scattered near cabins, children clinging to dead parents. Some survivors were barely alive, their eyes glassy, unable to speak. George Donner himself died before rescue reached him. His wife, Tamsin, refused to leave his side, choosing death beside her husband over life without him. When spring finally came and the last survivors were carried down from the mountains, only 48 of the original 87 had made it out. When the rescuers finally reached the valley below, word of what had happened spread like wildfire. The tale of the Donner Party became a national sensation, twisting through rumor and revulsion. Newspapers couldn't resist the grotesque details. They printed shocking headlines about cannibalism in the mountains, painting the survivors as monsters rather than victims. But those who had seen the camps firsthand told a different story, one of unimaginable endurance and despair. These were not savages. They were ordinary families, driven to the edge of human limits by starvation and cold. Yet society needed someone to blame, and the narrative began to fracture. James Reed, who had been exiled months earlier, was now hailed as a hero for organizing the rescues. Others, like Louis Keseberg, the last man found alive at the camp, became symbols of shame. Rumors spread that he had not merely eaten the dead, but killed to feed himself. Historians still debate whether that's true. Imagine the world Keseberg emerged into. The spring sun melting the snow, the smell of pine and death in the air, the bodies of those who never left being buried under shallow drifts. The rescuers burned some of the cabins to cleanse the horror, but no fire could erase what had happened there. The survivors were taken to Sutter's Fort in what is now Sacramento, where they were fed, clothed, and questioned. Some couldn't speak about it for the rest of their lives. Others tried to explain, but how do you describe the moment when hunger drives you past sanity? How do you confess to something that even the human tongue struggles to say out loud? Over time, details emerged in fragments. A mother admitted she'd given her children strips of flesh from a frozen body, telling them it was bear meat. A teenage girl remembered the sound of bones cracking as people boiled them for marrow. Another survivor, Patrick Breen, kept a diary, one of the few first-hand accounts that survive today. His entries are chilling in their simplicity. Mrs. Murphy said here yesterday that she thought she would commence on Milt and eat him, he wrote on March 9th. I don't think she has done so yet. It is distressing. He wrote of days so cold they could not leave their shelters, of children crying, of death after death. His handwriting, shaky and sparse, captures not only hunger but resignation. It's the record of a man watching humanity dissolve. Meanwhile, James Reed's rescue teams, the relief parties, faced their own horrors. Each time they returned to the mountains, the path was worse. Snowstorms erased their tracks. Wolves prowled near the camps. In one instance, rescuers found a child still alive beside the frozen bodies of her family. In another, they discovered remains stripped clean, bones gleaming white against the snow. They carried the survivors down the mountain, wrapped in blankets, eyes hollow and limbs wasted. The men who found them often broke down in tears. Even hardened frontiersmen said they had never seen such suffering. But here's the part that often gets overlooked. The Donner Party's tragedy was not just the product of nature. It was a failure of human judgment, pride, and misinformation. Had they stayed on the main California Trail, they might have reached safety before the first snow. But Hastings's false promises and Reed's determination to outsmart the odds doomed them. It's a story repeated through history. Ambition colliding with reality. Arrogance punished by circumstance. Modern scholars call it a cautionary tale of manifest destiny gone wrong. In a way, the Donner Party embodied the darker side of the American dream. They set out believing that courage and will could conquer anything, even the wilderness. Instead, the wilderness conquered them. Imagine being one of those who survived, stepping into spring sunlight after months in the dark. How would you live with what you'd done? Some tried to rebuild. James Reed reunited with his family and became a respected citizen of San Jose. Others lived quietly, avoiding the subject for the rest of their days. A few, like Keseberg, never escaped the shadow. He sued a newspaper for libel years later, trying to clear his name. In court, he admitted to eating human flesh, but only after the person had died naturally. The jury sided with him, yet the whispers never stopped. When he died, alone and impoverished, no one came to claim his body. As decades passed, the Donner Party became legend, part cautionary tale, part ghost story. Writers sensationalized the details, while historians tried to reconstruct the truth. Diaries, letters, and official reports revealed a grim but deeply human saga. One of hope turned to horror, survival balanced on the edge of morality. In the 20th century, archaeologists unearthed artifacts near Donner Lake, fragments of dishes, tools, and bones. Each discovery reopened old debates. Were they truly cannibals by choice or by necessity? Forensic studies suggested that many of the remains showed signs of butchering, confirming the grim truth. But to understand their actions, one must imagine their reality. The cold, the silence, the gnawing hunger that blurs thought and memory. And yet, amid all the horror, moments of compassion remained. Survivors helped each other when they could. Parents sacrificed food for their children. Strangers shared scraps of hide, bits of bone. Even as civilization crumbled around them, flickers of humanity survived. That's what makes the Donner story so haunting. It's not about monsters, but about ordinary people confronting the unthinkable. They were you and me, stripped of comfort, forced to face the raw core of existence. What would you have done in their place? Could you have resisted? Or would you have done what they did? Quietly, tearfully, praying for forgiveness with every bite. The Sierra Nevada stands silent today, its forests calm, the lake serene. Tourists drive through the area without realizing they're crossing ground once soaked in tragedy. A memorial stands near the lake, marking the height of the snow that winter, over 20 feet high. Beneath that snow, families huddled together and vanished. Every gust of wind through the pines seems to echo their whispers. Nature has reclaimed the land, but the memory remains. The Donner Party's name became synonymous with catastrophe, but also endurance. They suffered, yes, but they also survived long enough for their story to be told. Even now, their tale raises uncomfortable questions. Where is the line between survival and sin? Between instinct and morality? Between civilization and savagery? Experts in psychology and anthropology often point to the Donner Party when studying human behavior under extreme stress. The results are always the same. Hunger changes everything. It breaks down the boundaries of identity, faith, and law. When stripped of all else, survival becomes the only commandment. And yet, even in that frozen hell, some refused. They died clutching their faith, believing it better to perish than to cross that final line. Both choices, to live or to die, demand respect. Both tell us something profound about the human spirit. In the years that followed, the legend of the Donner Party evolved from whispered horror to cultural myth. It became a grim mirror reflecting America's own obsession with progress and conquest. Schoolbooks spoke of their tragedy, omitting the word that made people uneasy: cannibalism. Frontier tales turned them into a symbol of bad luck or divine punishment. But historians, journalists, and descendants have spent generations trying to tell the truth behind the myth, that this was not a story of monsters, but of human beings cornered by the impossible. Imagine, for a moment, the vast white silence of the Sierra Nevada. the trees groaning under ice, the air so still you can hear the creak of your heartbeat. Somewhere within that silence, a mother whispers to her child, promising the storm will end soon. She knows it's a lie, but she has to believe it. That is the essence of the Donner story. When researchers returned to the site decades later, they discovered what little remained of the cabins: charred logs, fragments of tools, the traces of a world built in desperation. Archaeologists noted that the shelters were ingeniously reinforced. Logs stacked tight, gaps filled with mud and cloth. Even as death closed in, they had tried to preserve some order, some spark of civilization, and scattered through the ashes were signs of their former lives: porcelain dishes, beads, and fragments of books. One item in particular haunted the team: a child's shoe, preserved by the cold. It spoke more eloquently than any document ever could. These were not faceless pioneers. They were families, dreamers, and believers who had wagered everything on a promise of paradise. But the story doesn't end in the snow. Its echoes followed the survivors wherever they went. Children grew up carrying the weight of their parents' choices. Some changed their names to escape the association. Others refused to speak of it altogether. The stigma of cannibalism clung to them like a shadow. In a society built on moral righteousness, no amount of context could erase the horror of what they'd done. And yet, those who studied the event came to see something deeper. A lesson about fragility, about how close humanity always stands to the edge. As one historian wrote, the Donner Party were not undone by nature, but by their belief that nature could be mastered. It's a lesson that resonates today. In our cities, our technology, our illusions of control. We build highways where they once struggled, but the mountains remain unchanged, eternal, watching. Imagine hiking through that area now. Crisp mountain air, the sun glinting off the snow, families laughing near Donner Lake. There's a plaque there, marking the site of the tragedy. Visitors leave flowers, sometimes coins, sometimes notes. Some write apologies, as though words can soothe ghosts. In winter, when the storms roll in and the lake turns gray, the forest still feels haunted. Locals say the wind changes tone, carrying whispers that sound almost like voices. Maybe it's imagination, or maybe, as some believe, the mountains remember. In recent decades, psychologists have re-examined the Donner Party's ordeal as a case study in extreme survival. The findings reveal astonishing mental endurance. Starvation doesn't just weaken the body, it rewires the brain. Hallucinations blur time. Morality becomes abstract. Decisions that would seem unthinkable in warmth and light become logical in cold and darkness. Yet amid that breakdown, there were acts of heroism too. Men who gave up their last scraps for children. Women who shielded others from despair. Even as hunger stripped them bare, they clung to fragments of empathy. That, perhaps, is the most remarkable part of their legacy. But here's the chilling truth. The Donner tragedy wasn't unique. Across history, other expeditions have faced the same horror. From shipwrecks in the Arctic to sieges in medieval castles, hunger has always tested the limits of morality. What makes the Donner case stand out is how close it was to civilization. Just a few days' journey from rescue, yet separated by a wall of snow. Modern experts estimate that if they had left Truckee Lake even 2 weeks earlier, none of this would have happened. Fate, timing, and human error wove together into a perfect storm. It's as if destiny itself conspired to turn their dream into a nightmare. Even after their ordeal, nature offered no closure. The spring melt revealed what the snow had hidden. Bones scattered across the campsite, half buried in ice. Some were animals, others were not. The rescuers burned what they could, hoping to purify the place. But memory, unlike flesh, doesn't burn. It lingers. Decades later, travelers passing through the Sierra Nevada would speak of an uneasy feeling near the old Donner Pass. Horses would shiver. Fires would sputter out. The old-timers said it was the spirits of those who perished. restless, still searching for home. And yet, the Donner Party's story endures not just because of horror, but because it forces us to confront ourselves. What would you do if hunger stripped away everything? Law, faith, even love? Would you hold on to your humanity, or would instinct take over? It's easy to say we'd choose nobility, but history suggests otherwise. In every age when desperation rises, morality bends. The Donner tragedy reminds us that civilization is a fragile illusion, a thin layer over the raw wilderness of the human heart. Today, the site of their camp is a state historic park. Visitors walk through quiet trails where the cabins once stood. There's a stone monument bearing the names of the lost, its base marking the depth of that deadly snow. On sunny days, the lake sparkles, serene and blue, a cruel contrast to what happened there. School children visit on field trips, their teachers explaining the pioneer experience. Few truly grasp what that means. They take photos, eat snacks, and move on, leaving the ghosts behind. But for those who pause, who listen to the silence, the weight of history is unmistakable. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The crunch of boots on snow, the wind rattling the cabin walls, the distant cry of someone calling a name that will never be answered. You can feel the hunger in your bones, the ache of waiting, the dread of another night. The Donner Party is not just a story of death, it's a story of how far we'll go to live. It's about the fragile line between survival and surrender. It's about hope refusing to die, even when surrounded by darkness. And perhaps, in that sense, it's also a reflection of us, modern travelers on our own journeys, chasing dreams, taking risks, sometimes blind to the dangers ahead. We like to think we've outgrown the wilderness, but it still lives inside us. The mountains may have changed, the wagons replaced by highways, but the human heart remains the same. Proud, hopeful, and terribly, beautifully fragile. The story of the Donner Party is more than a tragedy. It's a haunting mirror reflecting the endurance and frailty of human nature. In the quiet snows of the Sierra Nevada, desperation stripped away the masks of civilization and revealed what survival truly costs. Yet even in the darkest hunger, there were moments of compassion, courage, and sacrifice. They remind us that humanity is not erased by suffering. It is tested by it. The mountains that witnessed their torment still stand, silent and unchanging, as if keeping their secrets frozen in time. Every gust of wind, every ripple on Donner Lake whispers the same warning. Progress has a price, and nature never forgets. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon, like the video, and tell us in the comments what type of stories you'd like to see. Because as long as we keep telling them, these voices from the past will never be lost. And the lessons carved in ice, hunger and fear will continue to echo, reminding us of the thin, fragile line that separates civilization from chaos.